All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future-focused weekly update where I am committed to keeping you 10 steps ahead of what's going on at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. I've done all my testing this week, and guess what? I did not mess up my microphone 2 weeks in a row, so I'm excited about that. Once again, this week, I have far more things that I would like to get through, that I'd like to go through than I will have time for. But I'm going to get through some of the biggest ones. And actually, two of them were really a recent shift that I didn't have on the list. But given some of the development in this, I felt obligated to talk about these. So I've got four on the agenda. We'll see if I get through more than that. We'll see how it goes. I doubt I will. If anything, I might even have to cut it back. But for those of you who watch, listen to this, if you benefit from it, it would mean a ton to me if you shared this with someone else, if you gave it a review or a rating, just to help others find it, would mean the world. And but that's all I'm going to say on that one. So I want to get right into this. The first one I think is, to me, it was just kind of a cool, exciting development. I've got a lot of mixed feelings on it. So if you read the description, you might have seen pollution vacuum. And this one is really interesting in that it's over in Iceland, I believe, but they just opened the world's largest pollution vacuum. It's literally a giant pollution vacuum. It's called Mammoth by a company called Climateworks, I think something like that. And this isn't the first one. So if you're thinking like, wow, this is a brand new innovation, it's not, it's relatively new. This is the largest of them. This company actually had one previously called Orca. This one is 10 times better, but literally it is exactly what it says it is. It's a giant vacuum cleaner building that literally sucks carbon out of the air, then uses a process to break down the carbon and either repurpose it or actually shove it deep down into the earth where it can then turn back into rocks. So pretty cool, I think, in terms of what it does. This plant in particular removes 36,000 tons a year of carbon from the atmosphere, which is roughly 7,800 cars worth, if I'm remembering the statistics right. So not earth-shattering when you consider the fact that, if I remember my stats right, to reach our carbon goals, we need to remove like 20 million tons per year or something like that. So 36,000 isn't exactly taking a huge dent out of this, but it's progress towards it. There actually is plans to open one in Texas. I believe it was where I was reading. There's another one of these opening in Texas that actually does 500,000 tons of carbon per year. So this isn't this unique one-time thing. One of the things that I thought was pretty cool about this, though, was this one is actually, so Mammoth, this one by Climateworks up in Iceland, is actually powered by geothermal energy. So it's using clean energy. I know there was some other examples of this that were not, and it was kind of took a lot of heat because it was like, well, this is just a giant power suck that, yeah, it's pulling carbon out, but it requires so much carbon to power that is it really even balancing itself out. So this one was actually using clean energy, but they're relatively expensive. They're very power hungry, as you can imagine, running these giant vacuum cleaners, sucking the air in from the outside and doing this kind of stuff. And, there's another one that, again, depending on what you Google and what you find, you'll find that this technology has taken some heat because there is another company that's doing something similar. That what they're doing is there's more than meets the eye. They're actually sucking in this air, pulling carbon out of the air to jam it down into the earth to improve the way that they can get more oil out of the ground, which is already a limited resource. So it's a little one of these, like, are you really trying to benefit the planet, or are you trying to make it worse type thing? This is not that case. Climateworks is not doing any of those things. As I was watching and reading more about this, I've got, like many things, I have mixed feelings on it. It doesn't really matter where you are on the political spectrum. I think we can all agree that we would benefit from doing more to care about the planet and reduce our carbon emissions. Where you sit on there, I think everybody can agree, and I think we should. all agree that, hey, we could be doing more because we are putting out a ton of garbage. We're doing a ton of stuff that is not necessarily in our best interest. And it's easy to go, well, it's not affecting me. But if we think beyond the end of our own noses to the future generations, our kids, our grandkids, this kind of thing should be a net positive for us. We all should be looking for ways that we can do a better job of, as my grandfather always said growing up, leave the campsite better than when we got there. And so to me, this was again, the healthy criticism of, hey, how are we powering these things? How are we making sure they're actually beneficial? What are we doing with that carbon to make sure that we're not actually causing more problems with it? And from what I could find on this one, particular, this company and their mission on how they're doing it, I was actually really impressed. And so something like this to me is a really exciting advancement. It's a really exciting innovation. Do I think we're going to magically clean all the carbon out of the air by 2024? No, these things take time. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind with a lot of this stuff is it's going to take some time for this to happen. I'm actually really excited how much the younger generations care deeply about this. And this is where we're seeing a lot of innovation come out of it. So things like this to me are an encouragement that, yeah, we're starting to recognize more and more that we can't just do whatever the heck we want and not have to deal with the potential fallout or consequences of this stuff. So it was encouraging to see some of these things. My caution, my hesitation on this is what I know about human behavior. And that can be when we can come up with fixes for things. And I think this is the caution as we think about some of this stuff. And this isn't just with this one. I would say this is to anybody watching or listening. So part of it was just to let people know this was happening, because it's pretty cool to know what's going on in the world and see how we're making progress with some of this stuff and just share a perspective, which to me, the way this one in particular is happening, I think it's a net positive. We're using clean energy to do it. We're being wise with what we do with the carbon we're pulling out of the air. And ultimately, we're just trying to do a better job of taking care of the planet. So yay, Climate Works and the Mammoth thing. Kudos to you. I think we could continue going further down this path to take care of some of the stuff we're doing. The part that gives me pause that I think we need to be careful of, and this would be to anybody when we think about some of these solutions to these problems, is we sometimes have this bad habit of, well, now I've got a solution to it, so now I don't have to be quite as careful. Or now I can put out more carbon because, hey, we're able to suck it out of the air. So maybe I don't need to be as careful. And I think that's something that we just need to be really mindful of, and not so much that everybody listening and watching this can go, oh, so what am I supposed to do with this? But I think this is true with anything when we think about how we're taking care of the planet and things like that, is that we don't look to short-term solutions like this to go, great, now we don't need to change our behavior. So to me, as I see this as a net positive, I don't see this as, great, we've got this, now let's just keep going with everything else the way we're doing. I think some of the efforts around the globe right now to reduce our carbon footprint, to reduce the amount of carbon we're putting out into the atmosphere, I think that's phenomenal, and we need to continue doing that. But I do have concerns that sometimes things like this can have an unintended effect. And a good example, I think, of this is I've known people over the years who they tend to be the people that are, I put them in the category of like medicators. If they have a problem, they want a medication to solve that problem. And then once they find the medication to help solve that problem, they actually end up in a worse spot than they were before, because now instead of also changing their behavior, they actually pull back on that behavior change because they go, well, I don't need to change my behavior because now I have this medication to solve my high blood pressure or my cholesterol or my depression or whatever it is. And when it comes to human behavior, we can sometimes fall into this trap. And so as I see things like this, I'm encouraged that we're moving forward with some of this stuff. And I think there can be really positive ways we can do this. The caution I would give is that, as we read articles like this, or as we see positive innovations around this, there's another, if you haven't followed, there's a robot ocean vacuum that just goes around and picks up all the plastic. Super cool innovation. But again, these kinds of things can sometimes lead us to go, well, now I don't need to care as much because there's a plant somewhere sucking the carbon out of the air, picking the trash up out of the ocean. And I think my encouragement to everyone else is this is super exciting. And I hope to see more of innovations like this in the future. But let's not let that leave us to go, well, now I can care less because this innovation is out there. And I think that's just a watch out that we need to take into consideration when it comes to our behavior and our human tendencies. So that's that one. Moving on. This next section is going to take a little while because there's two things I want to talk through. And these two were the things that I did not originally have on my agenda, but I felt they were definitely worth adding to it. So two big announcements over the last week, roughly. So OpenAI came out and released their GPT-4o release. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to get to Google's Project Astra, because of course, OpenAI couldn't come out with a big announcement. Anytime one of these big players comes out with a big announcement, you can pretty much expect another one's going to come right on the heels of it. So I'm going to talk to both of them individually about some of the things I'm really excited and encouraged about, and some of the things that I have legitimate concerns about that I think we all need to be taking into consideration as we look at some of this innovation. So let's start with OpenAI's GPT-4o. I have said, and this is one of the things as I do these weekly updates, is it's always interesting how I'll have a point of view on, Friday one week when I record this, and then I go back and go, holy cow, I've already changed my tune on this. So I've been saying, we're kind of reaching to some degree a steady state with these large language models and their capability. And while we might see, slight iterations on where they're going, we're not necessarily going to see rapid, crazy changes. Some of the innovation that came out with these and did give me pause. And I went, wow, okay, this is creating almost a new ceiling that we're going to be able to hit. So I had previously thought, the curve is kind of logarithmic. We're going to be coming to the top of the curve, and yeah, we'll still see some incremental growth, but we're kind of hitting there. And these two announcements this week, to me, created a new logarithmic curve. So with OpenAI GPT-4o, I will tell you at first glance, if you've been out to ChatGPT or you use ChatGPT, you might not be that impressed on the surface. You might go, I'm not necessarily really noticing that big of a difference. So I want to talk through some of the basic changes that might not seem all that crazy. First is its response time. It is wildly faster. Wildly faster in its capability. So its responses, I would say, are more advanced, more robust, and they're also significantly faster. The latency between asking your question, prompting it, and getting a response, and I'll talk to where this ties into things, is ridiculously faster. The other piece is its advanced image generation. Now, I will say, first of all, its ability to create images is much, much better. I was playing around with it all week this week, and it's really good. I think one of the most notable things, not only in just its accuracy of what it can generate, but text. If you've ever tried to generate an AI-generated image and you have any sort of text, or you ask it to put any text, you're probably familiar with the gobbledygook it often puts, or you're like, swing and a miss. You got close, not quite. That has radically changed. I was testing it, can you do this? Can you make it say this? Can you add this? And it actually is accurate now, which again, you might go, well, small change, right? This isn't a whole lot different. On the image generation, the other thing that was wildly crazy, and I've been playing with this, is now, before, if you've done any image generation work with it, you know that you could create an image, and if it wasn't right, you'd have to reprompt it. And even if you said, can you keep that, but can you just make this change, you'd get a new image that wasn't really even close to what you originally did. Now, not only will it maintain what you did, and really with a high degree of accuracy, you can actually go into the image, and I just did this before, where I just highlighted a specific character in the image and said, can you change this one to that? And it preserved the rest of the image and just modified the part that I selected. So this is pretty significant in its advanced capability. I think one of the other things that is cool-ish is they've made GPT-4o available to everyone. That was one of the big announcements with ChatGPT, is now you can have access to the latest model, even on the free version, which has left a lot of people who are paying for it going, why am I paying for ChatGPT? Granted, there is some advanced capability, greater token lengths that you can use, and you can have more conversation with it without it saying, you've timed out type of a thing. But it's where we're going with this that I think the paid features come into play. But I think the other thing is we're going to continue to see this as the technology democratizes. We're going to start to see it go more and more free. We're all going to have access to this. And that's a mixed bag in terms of what that means. Now, those functionality pieces that I shared with you, that's not the stuff that gave me pause and made me a little unsettled as I, had some restless sleeps this week. Because at the end of the day, if you're someone who is using ChatGPT and you're going in and you're asking for things and you want quicker responses, more accurate responses, if you're using it for image generation, you're like, this is great. This is all good, right? And free to everybody. How could anything be wrong with that? This is where my hesitation starts coming into it. So as I watch some of the demos, and not all of these features have been released. So if you have the paid version of it, you may not see it. I've toyed around with some of the functionality. It's not, I don't think, widely rolled out yet. But one of the things that they have added to this is the ability to now with the app, or even the desktop app, there's a desktop app now too as well, where it can see. Okay, so it can see, you can turn on your camera, you can turn on screen sharing, and it can see and respond to things in real time. Going back to what I said before, the speed of this has been dramatically increased, which when you think about being able to see and respond, you want it to go quickly. You don't want to show it something and then have to wait for a while for it to process. And this processing capability exponentially growing is now making that much more viable. So again, not all these functionality. If you go out and you're like, well, Christopher, you said it can do this, I'm not able to do it. You might not have access to it yet. But on the mobile device, you can turn your camera on and it can see and interact with what it sees and observe things. It can, there's an example, if you want to see it, you can look it up, where they just point it at a math equation and it can assess the math equation. And then again, from a response and latency, this is where conversational AI is really getting a little bit unsettling, to say the least. And I'll talk about why it's unsettling, because some folks might hear this and go, this is great, isn't it? Yes. And there's more to the story. So now you can literally show it something and talk to it as though you're talking to another human being, and it will dynamically respond. So some of the demos, if you see, and I was playing around with this with my kids last night, you can actually interrupt it and it'll stop. And so before, with these large language models, if you've played with them, you kind of got to wait for it to finish its thing. And then you got to go back and then, ask it to make another change. Now it can be in the middle of something and you can interrupt it and say, actually, no, you're off track. I actually am trying to do this. And this is more if you're doing it with the voice version of it. So if you haven't played with the voice, you actually can talk to it like a person and it will interact with you on a human level. Like I said, I was doing this with my kids last night. We were quizzing it on some of the stuff that we were doing for their school this week. And so again, first of all, the conversational and the low latency allows you to talk and interact and interrupt like you would, much like a human conversation with it. And it is quick enough to respond that way. But now its further advanced capability is it has vision capability. So its multimodal capability can now see things, interact, and respond all at the same time in almost near real time. I won't say it's 100% the same as if you were sitting having a conversation with me, but it's pretty darn close. Now, where I get concerned to some degree on this one, again, it's less about the technology and more about our human tendencies, which is we can become very over-reliant on things. And if you listen to my weekly update last week, as OpenAI starts to explore responsible adult use, which you can listen to last week's if you want, but I don't think there is responsible adult use. You start to think about how this changes human behavior and the way we're interacting with AI. So no longer will we just interact with it in this 1990s RPG text-based approach, but we will begin to interact with it like we would interact with another human being, which is why you see so many things like Apple. Likely, Apple's going to pair with OpenAI to basically make their model the new AI assistant on our phone. So when you think about that, suddenly now you're talking with your phone like you would be talking with another human being. And as we think about human behavior and this over dependence, we can, one, not only start to form unhealthy emotional bonds with the technology because now it's behaving more and more like a person, and the lines between the technology and, say, your friend suddenly get blurred, and suddenly you can start talking with it as though, well, why would I call my friend and talk through what I'm going through when I can actually just pull up my AI assistant and talk through and maybe get some advice and feedback. And I think there can be some healthy uses of that. I am concerned that we don't always have the wherewithal to do that in a healthy way and can become over dependent and not realize some of the unintended consequences that can come with that. I think the other part with that, and again, with that one, when you think about it being integrated into your mobile device, it just becomes that much more risky for us. And I think we need to be very careful with how much we are engaging with it and how we're engaging and for what purposes. Do I think it's great that we'll be able to interact with AI on a more human level and work with it the way we work with a person when we're trying to problem solve? I think there's definitely some benefits to that. Am I concerned that we are going to become over reliant and over dependent on it for things, and in our complacency stop thinking, stop, really rustling through things and just go, I'm just going to talk to my AI agent to help me figure this stuff out? Yeah, I think that's a real risk that we need to be mindful of as we look at these advanced models and some of the capability coming out. The vision capability that, so actually, before I get to the vision, when you think about the fact that you're interacting with this now on a voice level, which you could before, but not to this degree, you got to remember this thing is now listening. So when I say AI has ears now with these new capabilities, it truly does, especially when you think about how people are going to interact with it. And if you think as it's listening to what you're saying, it's only hearing your voice and what you're asking, it's not. And I know this because even last night when I was playing with my kids, it was picking up other things that were happening. My wife was talking to one of the other kids in the other room, and it was picking that up and getting confused by what was being asked. And so when you start to think about now AI having ears to everything that's going on and some of the potential risks in terms of how are we using this with wisdom and discernment, and how are we being sure that we're not using this, or they're not being used for purposes that we aren't necessarily opting in for. Because again, once you say, yeah, go ahead and listen, you're authorizing that AI to say, yeah, listen to whatever's going on. You are giving it permission to do that. And so I think we need to be very mindful of that and think consciously about when are we actually engaging in that, because we are consenting to giving AI the ability to listen to whatever it is that's going on. And I think this is going to start bringing up some other concerns that people are going to have of, well, what if I'm giving consent to my AI to listen, but the other people in the room aren't giving consent to that AI to listen? And what does that potentially have implications for? I think the other part that is something we need to be mindful of is the fact it has eyes now. So this near real-time ability to see things and interact with it and respond to it, contextualize the environment it's in. Yes, can that have some really great benefits for us? Sure. If you're trying to fix your sink and you can't quite figure out what's going on, or you're trying to do something and you go here, you want to be able to just show it a picture of it or a live video of it and have it be able to contextualize it, that can be really beneficial. But again, are we being really thoughtful, intentional about what are you giving it access to see? And are you thinking about the implications of that? Because it's going to become easy for us to become so over dependent on this that we just don't even put in the thought of, here, I'm turning my camera on so I can talk to my AI assistant, and what really am I authorizing it to see in my environment? And have I considered that before I just say, yeah, go ahead, take a look at what I'm doing here? Um, I was, again, impressed with its ability, with this vision capability to detect and respond in an emotionally intelligent way. One of the demos I saw was talking about, looking, it was showing somebody on a camera and asking for feedback on how this person was. And it did a very good job of accurately and nearly instantaneously responding to what it was observing. Now, I know some people might see this and freak out. Some might see it and go, this is no big deal. To me, I'm right in the middle, and it's really more because of how we tend to be as people and some of the vulnerabilities we have that this now opens up for us, and where we may go with it. I think the other thing, and then I'll transition to the Google Project Astra, is that it sounds great that they say, hey, this is wonderful. We're making this free to everyone. We want everybody to have this advanced AI capability. We're making it free to everyone. Nothing in life is free. So just remember that. Nothing in life is free. And so if someone is giving you something for free, you are the product. And so OpenAI is saying now everyone can access GPT-4o and soon all of these advanced capabilities for free. You are the product. And of course, OpenAI wants you using all of these capabilities to further train its AI. Yes, are you getting a benefit out of it? But you're also training the AI on things. Right now, AI does not have eyes and ears. It does not have a lot of context. And that's a real problem for some of the advanced AI things that they're trying to do is there's just not enough real world contextual data to train AI to know how to respond, how to interact, how to do all these things. You give away a AI application that allows you to turn your camera on and walk around and show it things and talk to it and have it pick up environmental cues with its eyes and ears and figure things out. You're giving it unlimited access to data that can further train it. Now, again, this could be a really positive thing. It also has some really potential negative consequences. And I think my advice to everybody, because you may hear this and freak out and go, I'm deleting everything off my phone. I don't think that's a healthy response. But what I think we need to be thinking about is how are we being extremely intentional and thoughtful about when, where, and how we're using these things so that we aren't inadvertently sharing and training AI on things that we don't necessarily want? And how are we keeping parts of our lives still private from this? And that's going to become harder and harder and harder. But I think this is something that we all need to be aware of, because what can look great on the surface, hey, free tool, does all these things, you'll never have to do anything anymore, suddenly has other things that just need to be taken into consideration as you go down this path. And so as we go down this path, I absolutely encourage people to experiment with this. Go out and test some of this functionality. It's pretty cool, but test it with discernment and caution, just thinking carefully about when, where, and how you're using it so that you don't end up with some inadvertent consequences and you don't become over dependent on it. All right. Now, on a similar but different note, I want to talk about Google's Project Astra, which this, again, there's a ton of stuff that came in. So I'm not going to do an overview of everything that was revealed at Google's kind of big launch event for Project Astra. The one I want to highlight in particular that, again, gave me pause was how integrated these AI systems are becoming into literally every aspect of our life, and how people who even may go, well, I don't really, see myself using this. It's like, well, you're really not going to have a choice if you plan on existing in, any sort of regular environment, because it is going to become so embedded into it. And one of the things that I saw in particular, so Google had very similar functionality in some of their stuff that they were announcing, again, to kind of keep up with GPT-4o. So I won't repeat all that functionality. So everything I just described for GPT-4o is coming to Google Gemini. They're already releasing some of these features and functionalities. So all of that you can kind of imagine just in a different vein, Apple, Android type of a thing. But then where Google really is bringing this to life is their integration with their Google Suite and all the different applications that they have. So think Gmail, the Google Workspace, all the different stuff that goes along with that. And if you're a corporate employee or just an employee in general that uses these kind of systems, you can start to think about the different possibilities of how all these things start coming together. And again, on the surface, can seem really great. One thing they talked about was their Google Gems, which now not yet. They'll be released in September, I think it was. But you can set up specific AI agents that are actual employees in the company. They have an email address. They have a chat thing. They can they basically exist as an entity in the organization, and they're specially trained for the purposes that you need them for. And you can now integrate them into everything. You can copy them on all your meetings so that they can attend any of the meetings that you're at. They can see, you can copy them on all the emails that you have. You can copy them on, you can include them in group chat threads, things like this. And then at that point, you can ask it for things, hey, what was the summary? Where are we on this project? Can you pull all the details and summarize all of this for us? That's great. Would you also be able to put that into a brief few slides and send that out to the rest of the team? And all of this can be done in near real time. And again, there's a human in the loop, like it'll confirm with you, is this, what you want to see? Yes. And then you can ask it to do all this stuff. But as I was watching this one in particular, I know a lot of people today that all the things it just showed, that's their job. That is their job. They are hired into companies to do exactly everything these Google Gems were doing. Now, I don't say that as a doom and gloom, fear mongering, oh my gosh, AI is going to take away all human work. Because as I was watching these things, I went, there's a lot of this stuff that I know is just administrivia that is consuming lots and lots of people's time. And imagine the things they'd be able to do if they didn't spend half their day scouring through emails, trying to remember where the project status was, or who was on point for doing this, or what the action items were, or what we committed to last week, type of a thing. Yeah, I think there's some real benefit to it. But when I say I know there are people that are hired on to do this today, it's because this is very time and labor intensive. And oftentimes this results in people having jobs that is nothing but this. Where it's concerning is, again, going back to human behavior, we are often very resistant to change. And we often far overestimate that what we're doing today is the value we provide to our organizations, to our families, to whatever. So we think, oh, I do these things, and that's what inherently makes me valuable. So when things come and threaten to change that, we get very protective and defensive. And instead of going, hey, my job was the PM of the group and I did nothing but scour through emails and translate them into PowerPoints, guess what? Now I don't need to spend as much time doing that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use AI to help me do that. I'm going to offer a higher service level, or I'm going to spend more time with the people that are on the projects to dig deeper into what they're trying to accomplish. I'm going to try and look out for risks that others may not be. Instead of doing that, there can be this perception of, well, that's what I do. And we can get stuck in this rut of complacency. And it's very much, I am very concerned that there will be large swaths of people who will be similar to that person. And we've all seen and experienced this person on the team. And if you haven't, it was you. But we've all seen and experienced this person on the team that is, not adding value to the team, toxic to the team. They're continuing to get that feedback, but they just don't want to listen to it. They just won't change. They won't, adapt their behavior. And then all of a sudden, 3 years later, their boss calls them in and HR is sitting there and they say, thank you. We appreciate everything you've done. Unfortunately, we're letting you go. And they're completely shocked. It's not shocking to anyone else, but it's shocking to that individual. And as I was watching some of these capabilities with how Google is so deeply integrating AI into this, and then thinking through all the people I know where I go, that is your job. That is what you spend 50, 60 hours a week doing every week. And AI can do this more accurately and provide a higher level of service. You can automate all this stuff. I am concerned that there are going to be a lot of people that, if they don't change, are going to be at a high risk of being obsoleted. And so I don't bring this up to scare people or make them afraid or sit and worry about, do you think, I've talked about it before. If you've listened to my other human updates, I don't think it's helpful to tell people that AI is coming for all human labor. Because personally, as I was watching all of these things, I was sitting here imagining, oh my gosh, I know all the things I would look forward to doing with the time I had that wasn't spent on some of this stuff. But I know that that is not necessarily the average response. And so for people out there who watch and listen to this, who, or you are somebody who you see this in the people around you, this is an opportunity to really push and encourage people to say, you really do need to focus on this. You need to think about the work you do and the contributions you make and how you're going to adapt and what are you going to do differently. Because if your job was to put the PowerPoint together and keep track of the meeting notes and send out, to-dos to everybody on the team, that's not going to be needed anymore. And in the past, there were ways that this could be automated, but it was not terribly accurate. And when I was watching all the things that this advanced AI could do, and some of the things that you think about, all the things I described in GPT-4o, which I said is also coming to Google, you think about that real-time human interaction, the ability to adapt and get a very precise change to what you need, the ability to do this at scale, and all this other stuff. You start thinking about all of that and then start translating that into where does that happen today? You can start to see why the risk of job disruption is so significant to a lot of people. And your attitude towards it is going to depend on whether you say, well, that stuff is the stuff that I do, and I don't want to give that up. Or if you go, awesome, I have this other huge list of things that I would much rather do, and I want to spend my time doing that. So thank you for letting me know about this. I can't wait, and I look forward to adopting these things so I can shift. And I think that's an attitude that we really need to push and encourage in people, and probably, not probably, for sure, need to develop some serious skills in a lot of people who maybe that's all they've ever had to do, or maybe that's the only thing their organization has really needed them for. And so how do we prepare them for the change that's coming? Now, for anybody who may listen to this and be a little bit unnerved or disturbed by this, I will be the first to admit that many of the things that I get unsettled about, it's a few years in coming. So if anybody's thinking these things I described are going to happen in 24 or 25, I just know what the change curve is like and how much resistance there is to AI adoption, and people are just stubborn. So some of this stuff is going to take a while to actually get there. I would say, it's probably 3 to 5 years before we really start to see the full effects of this, but the technology is already there. So anybody who's out there thinking that, oh, well, AI can't do this, go watch the Google Project Astra reveal, or go watch a deep dive into GPT-4o and what it's capable of. And you will very quickly start to see the tech is here. It can do this stuff. The only thing slowing it down is really our willingness to adopt it. And at some point, we're going to hit a level of maturity and adoption that even if you aren't ready, everybody else will. So you either have an opportunity to participate in the change or have the change happen to you. And I think that's where I would just encourage people to do it with wisdom, do it with discernment, be really mindful and careful. But if you are not actively thinking about some of this stuff and looking about how your job will change and what you can be doing and how you'll be spending your time elsewhere, you need to right now and not wait. Otherwise, you'll be scrambling and you'll be behind the gun. And I don't ever want to see anybody in that position. Now, that leads me to my last one, which I understand where this is a natural pairing coming out of this. Sam Altman has talked a lot about this. There's been a lot more talk about universal basic income and how AI not only has the ability to potentially fund some of this, but it really, because of all this disruption I just talked about, it almost should be mandated to help fund some of this UBI stuff so that we at least know people in these transition seasons will be able to make the transition, or people who are struggling to make the jump have some sort of financial security. Because if you followed my stuff for long, I talk a lot about the fact that I have real concerns about the class divide that's going to come from some of this stuff. The haves and have nots, and the folks who are super adept to adapting to some of these things will get further ahead. And the people who are struggling and lagging in some of this will fall further behind. And one of the proposed ways that is continuing to come up in conversations is, well, do we take some of the revenue or some of the capability, really the revenue that is coming from all of this AI advancement, and do we somehow use that to fund some base level income to ensure that people all have enough money to live? I have mixed feelings on this for the same reasons I do with the world's largest pollution vacuum. I think on the surface, it can sound like so to be clear, lest anybody get really mad at me and say, so you don't think everybody should at least have enough to survive? Actually, I do. I think it would be phenomenal if everybody had enough to survive and did not have to worry about being unable to provide for themselves and their family. Where I get concerned as these things start to move forward is, in theory, that sounds really easy. In practice, it's far more complicated than it really ends up playing out. And I don't know how this would all come together. And because again, when I think about universal basic income, okay, in theory, yes, I think everybody should not have to worry about, will you be able to survive if you were unable to work? I think it would be phenomenal if we got to a point where that was not the case. You didn't have to worry about that. The challenge is people's definition of what is enough to survive. We're never going to get a straight answer on that. My definition is going to be different than yours, than the guy next door to me, than the girl down the street. Like, everybody is going to have this different definition. And we're often terrible at distinguishing between what we need and what we want. Everybody might say, well, we all need a new Tesla. Well, do we really need do we even need a vehicle type of a thing? And certain people's circumstances are going to require things that are slightly different than someone else's. So you start thinking about, there's not this one number that we can get to and just say, hey, if we could just get everybody to have at least this much money, we'll be fine, because that number doesn't exist. And so I think trying to get to this is very difficult. I think the other thing with it is, going back to the pollution issue, we do run into the risk of, okay, well, if we create an environment where you could survive without having to work, does that incentivize people then to not work? Because, well, I don't need to. Now, I will be the first to say that on one side of the political lane, I think there is far too much of a discarded attitude towards this, and thinking that, well, if we just give people things, they'll just exploit it and take advantage of it, and they won't want to work and they'll sit around. I don't think that's helpful. And if you've listened to some of my previous stuff, people actually, the vast majority of people, want to be a valued contributor to society. So some of this paranoia of, well, if we come up with universal basic income, everyone's just going to sit around and do nothing. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I do think we need to be mindful of, if universal basic income just makes it such that you can live a super comfortable lifestyle and not do anything. I mean, even myself, I'd be like, well, do I really want to go through all the hassle of some of the things that I deal with? So it's a real human behavior situation that we have to deal with. But I don't think that means we should avoid it altogether, because going back to some of the stuff I talked about with AI disruption, I think there is a significant risk. There are going to be large numbers of people who are significantly disrupted by AI and who are going to really, really, really struggle to adapt. And I don't think it's going to be permanent. I think over time we'll close that gap and we'll adapt and we'll adjust. But when I think about the pace at which this is moving, I do think there is going to be this window of significant disruption where there are going to be a lot of people struggling to make it through. And I do think the conversation and the focus on, what are we going to do about that? And how do we think about that from an economic standpoint? And how do we think about, rather than these big tech companies or some of these folks who already have more money than they know what to do with, just continues to fuel that, how do we redistribute some of that? Now, don't listen to that and think I'm promoting socialism, or let's just take from the rich and just distribute it out to the poor in kind of a Robin Hood sense. But I do think we need to think about, how are we making sure we're not leaving people behind? And I think that is a serious consideration that we do need to be thinking about as we move into this age, is how do we make sure nobody is left too far behind? And how are we doing things to make sure people can thrive and succeed in this disrupted and kind of ever-changing world, especially given the pace at which it's moving? I can tell you right now, well, we have gone through things like this in the past. We have never experienced what we're about to experience in the next few years. And it's largely due to the pace. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say every week goes by and I go, holy cow, like I thought we had more time before we got to this. And when you think about some of these AI changes, when you go, well, now if we're contextualizing this and it's fed all the data that previously it didn't have, again, that logarithmic scale is not leveling out. Now, all of a sudden it's up here. And so when some of us are feeling like, hey, we might be able to actually sit through a level of stability for a bit, it's like, nope, not really, because now we just created a new scale. And I think we're just going to continue to see some of these advancements. So when it comes to this stuff, I do think we need to be having productive conversations about, how do we prevent people from falling too far behind? And what we need is, we need people from both sides of the table. And that's one of the things that concerns me about this, is we've become so politically charged that anybody who says, hey, I think we need to make sure nobody falls behind, is suddenly accused of being a socialist or a communist, and it shuts down the conversation. And anybody who says, I do think we need to take into consideration that if we just give people things and we don't require them to continue to grow and hold them accountable to adjust and adapt, there will be a complacency that comes into place that isn't healthy. And all of a sudden you're accused of being cruel and you don't care about the disadvantage. It's like, we need to stop that. That's what we need to stop, so we can have a productive, broad spectrum conversation about the fact that AI is going to massively disrupt us at a pace that we have never experienced in human history. So what do we do to go through that in a productive way? How do we hear from both sides of the aisle and figure out what is a healthy way of approaching this? How do we make sure we're providing some infrastructure and support for people who are going to struggle with this? I know some really great people in my life that, again, when I was watching some of these, I'm like, they've spent the last 20 years doing this. And I don't know that they are prepared to upskill themselves. And they're not at an age where they can just say, you know what, I'll just retire. But they also aren't necessarily in a position where they can just go, great, run me back through all the master classes I need so I can radically, completely change everything I've ever done in my professional life. What do we do about those folks? What do we do about the mental health and the wellness of people who are already stretched thin, and now we're going to stack this on top of that? How do we make sure that they don't need to worry about, oh my gosh, if I don't figure this out, I'm going to starve to death or I'm going to lose my house? That's not a fear that I think anybody should have to worry about when we think about how much money this stuff is creating and how much wealth we have. And I think we need to be able to talk about this in a healthy, productive way, instead of just arguing and shooting, shots across the bow at each other, so we can come up with some sort of plan that can hopefully help get us to a better place. And I don't have the answers. Would I love to be involved in more of those discussions and bring a healthy, balanced perspective and hear both sides and go, what if we did something like this and actually move it forward? Absolutely. But I have not cracked the code to, well, what would that look like? But I think it's something that we are going to have to think about and engage in. And I hope that we can lay down our political swords and get to a healthy discussion about what we do, or it's going to be even worse than it's already going to be. And again, I tend to be very much an optimist, and I think there's a lot of bright futures ahead. I firmly believe we'll get through this, but I think we've got some rough roads that we're going to have to navigate. And if we can't get over ourselves and our egos and our, attitudes, we're actually just making this harder on us. It's not that we won't solve it, it's that we're making it exponentially harder than it needs to be. And I hope we can mitigate that. And if anything, my call to that is that in all of these topics, climate, AI advancement, integration into work, universal basic income, all of these things, my ask would be that we set aside our egos and say, these are real problems. They're going to be affecting every single person on the planet. They're going to be affecting the generations to come. Let's have a healthy, productive discussion on it so we can figure out what is the best way we can approach this that meets the needs of everybody. So with that, a little longer than I would have liked to, but these are some really big, heavy topics that I wanted to make sure I get through. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend. Hopefully this gives you some food for thought. Hopefully it doesn't keep you up at night like it has for me this week, but I do hope it challenges you to think and lean into these and be starting to think about what role you can play in being part of the solution, because you're going to have to deal with it one way or the other. There's just no way around it. So with that, I will talk to you later and see you on the other side.